Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics, brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the writer of comics like Deadeyes, Savage Avengers, and Marauders. It's Gerry Duggan. Thanks for coming on, Gerry.
Thank you very much for having me, David.
So we are largely going to be talking about the X-Men world today, and we're going to be talking about Marauders. But before that, I wanted to talk about your background with the X-Men and with these characters in general, because you know, Marauders is a title that is loaded with relationships that have went back a long time. I mean, to the point where two of the main characters, arguably the two main characters, literally first appeared in the same exact issue. Between Emma Frost and, you know, Kate Pryde in issue 129 of Uncanny. So, you know, going back, it seems like you had a lot of background with the characters and with the X-Men based off your interviews. What is your X-Men origin story as a reader?
It's a great question. My X-Men origin is kind of my secret origin too, and that was my old man and my mom. They would buy me comics off the newsstands and off of checkout lanes at supermarkets back when comics were sold at those places. And you know, this was pre-direct market young comic reader. And I in my 7th grade year found a local baseball card shop that also sold some comics. He was buying stuff in bulk and going to garage sales and that sort of stuff. And everything was just getting dumped into long boxes. I had never seen a comic in a long box before, and it blew my mind that there was a special box for comic books. And it was just a disaster. It was unsorted. So he paid me to come in after school in comics. My first job, I guess, a violation of labor laws. And so that was, though, the first thing that I found. I want to say, I think it was Wolverine, the image of Wolverine that like made me realize I have to read all of this X-Men. Mm-hmm. And you know, look, it was the first. I was always a Spider-Man guy. All of a sudden, I was in this like soap opera world of mutants and humans, and you know, the Hellfire Club, and so I'm an old school X-Men reader. They were my jam. I loved them. I started at the beginning and read everything. I was paid in comics. They were often Simonson, Thor, or X-Men, and that was my secret origin. I turned my love of comics into a very unlikely career by always working with people more talented than I am. So that was it. You know, I fell in love with, you know, at that time, you know, obviously it's crazy to say, you know, Claremont was writing new issues. Byrne, I want to say, what was Byrne's last year on? He was already off on FF, I feel like, in 87, right?
I think so.
So he had wrapped off, and I think new issues were at that time Claremont and Romita Jr. And you know, I never really crushed on Kitty, but she was a cool lens character into that world. And you know, I saw a lot of the discussion around the first couple of issues of Marauders. The first 2 issues really are a Kate story because she can't use the gates. But I saw people going, "Why Kate?" And I realized, well, my entrance into the X-Men world was just a little different. In the first year that I read X-Men, really, she was both Kitty and Kate. Mm-hmm. You know, Days of Future Past had just happened in the publishing world. I read those really quickly. I probably binged them in a weekend. And so she's always been, you know, Kate kind of fell away from publishing a little bit, but she loomed large in my brain. Yeah. I think that's the fun thing about what's happening now is there's a lot of people involved in X-Men comics that have been thinking about X-Men comics for decades.
Oh yeah.
So like that, and I think that comes through on every page, and the stuff that we have coming on the horizon is, I think even better. I think our best stuff is on drawing tables right now. So I'm really excited to see what everyone thinks. And I know you've been very kind, so thank you. I'm glad you're enjoying the new work.
Oh yeah, no, it's been awesome. But I have to say about Kate/Kitty. I mean, the funny thing about it is, and like this is not a perfect analogy, but I feel like this is slightly in the ballpark of why that character is such a lasting character. I remember there was this line in like Astonishing X-Men, the Whedon Cassidy stuff, where one of the like one young men students is talking about how she's like the cool cute teacher that like everybody like is like interested in, everything like that. But I mean, I
Right.
feel like there's something about Kate Pryde that makes her like the character you want to be friends with, the character you identify with, like the lens character, as you said, the one that everybody kind of you feel like you understand, and if you knew her, she would understand you. Obviously, she's fictional, but you know what I'm saying.
Totally. Yeah, totally. Because look, a lot of these characters, like, boy, it's so cool to read a Wolverine story or a Colossus story. At the end of the day, you might go, if I'm going to hang out with those people, I'm going to get killed. There was like the element of danger that, like I wrote Deadpool for years. I don't want to be friends with
He'd
Deadpool.
be the worst friend.
He'd be the worst friend. You would not last long. Anyone
No.
in his orbit is just a future, maybe off-panel death.
Mm.
You just, what a disaster. I also listen, Kate, her power set is so cool. I would, if I were granted a magic wish to gain the fictional, the powers and abilities of one fictional character, I guess maybe like even more than Superman, I would go, boy, it would be so cool to like be a ghost and walk through a wall
Yeah.
and always know. And then that sort of led to this chapter in her life, this great irony that she can't use the mutant transit system. All of a sudden that felt like lightning in a bottle for her, and that was a gift for her. And even if not every gift is what fans want, I'm just sort of, and I think we're all just collaborating on the stuff that we want to see out there in the world, and that's really the only sort of compass that you can have. But when I'm gone, if somebody were to go, hey, I want to roll back some of this Kitty stuff, and she doesn't mind being called Kitty, you go, yeah, that's comics, that's great. Like right now, we're flexing our muscles, and we have a lot of rope because we were a successful launch. I don't think that you'll see her called Kitty. Maybe ever again. I don't know.
Yeah.
That would be cool. Although I left a lot of wiggle room, right? Like the idea, and I think she says this. It's some version of the X-Men can do amazing things or astonishing things. I don't think they're going to be able to call me Kate, and she's kind of right.
Yeah.
Bishop gets it wrong, and even when she appeared in X-Force, the name of the tug was the Kitty Hawk.
Hmm.
Somebody painted that on there, and you just go, yeah, it's going to take a while. It actually, I don't want to name check this person. It's such a specific name, and it's a real person. When I went to all through grade school, middle school, high school with a girl and then a young woman who had a name that was very unique. That it turned out it was just a nickname, and when we got to high school, she asked to be called something different.
Hmm.
It wasn't Mittens, but it almost was Mittens.
Yeah.
And we were like, yeah, sure, Mittens, we'll call you your real. And it was like driving a stick shift where you're grinding gears. You slow your speech down with the person and go, yes, of course, Mittens. And I've known other people for different reasons that would just choose to be called something different. And it ended up being a large part of the discussion around the first issue, which I was surprised by.
Yeah. I mean,
Maybe I shouldn't have been.
Well, no, I mean it's kind of like the question of identity. It's making a very deliberate choice, but I do think it is interesting how difficult that can be. Like one of my best friends, we've called him by his last name for the entire time we've been friends, and now he's married, and his wife has his last name, and he has two kids, both of whom have his last name, and so calling him by his last name is basically like calling his entire family simultaneously, and it's just really funny. And sometimes people will call him by his first name, and I'll be like, who are you talking to?
Yeah.
And I'm
Who
like,
are you
oh,
talking
wait,
about? Yeah.
okay, that's his first name. I forget that sometimes. But yeah, I mean, I do think, I mean, there's a lot of things I love about it, but just like one of the things I thought was really great about what Jonathan did in House and Powers was he tapped into X-Men fans' deep love of like speculation and opening doors that you might go down, but you don't know if it's ever going to be a huge thing. And the like simple things like even, calling Kitty Kate. Like that could be something bigger later down the line, or like her inability to go through the door in the gateways. That could be a big thing. I mean, like all these different things. I mean, and also just the mere fact that the person who can go through anything can't go through the doors that any mutants can go through. These things are just like I don't know. I mean, it's not Pandora's box. It's like Pandora's box of plot if it was desirable. So a
Yeah.
horrible analogy, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. No, I had the unique perspective of hearing Jonathan tell that story. I want to say it was the first time I heard it, I think was in October of 2018. It
Mm-hmm.
might have been before that, but we had a retreat that autumn in New York, and I knew what he was walking in with. We knew that he was cooking that, and Jordan told me, hold on to your potatoes. It's going to be quite a ride, and he was right. I was totally blown away, uh, by the possibility of what it presented.
Right.
It really shook things up in this. I was I consider myself the first fan of the book, the books, the minis. I wasn't sure that I had a story to pitch them, but I knew I was leaving Guardians, and I had always loved the X-Men, and they were going to need product. So I just said, I want to stay in touch. I'll email you some ideas, and some of them landed real well, and some of them did land real well, but might not be right for now. And it's been a really exciting collaboration. Some of the stuff I think that he's a great collaborator.
Mm-hmm.
He knows what he needs, and then he will turn around and sort of go, what else do we need? What do you need? What else is on the island? Both literally and figuratively, and that's the ideal place to really have fun. And I think I may have said this to you. Right now we're having a lot of fun, hoping that translates so that our artist collaborators are having fun, and if that happens, the circuit is complete. Hopefully, the readers will have fun. And like I loved X-Men 3 this week. Marauders 3 dropped this week, and I was like, oh, it's a shame it's dropping alongside that book, because that book is a slapping success. It's awesome.
Yeah, horde culture or hoarder
Yeah,
culture. Oh my
I think
god,
it's
incredible. I also love that this is something I pointed out on Twitter, but I thought it was hilarious that like not everyone, I don't know if people really think like about X-Men fans are always going to read into things that are happening in the book, on the data pages, everything like that. But there was one little thing that I didn't see anybody talk about, and it was the fact that that Horticulture's main base of operations was based out of Sedona, Arizona, currently, which is actually like notably a retiree community. It's like a place where people retire, and like the fact that had that, like my sister used to live in Arizona. I was like, Sedona, I know that place. Oh my God, Jonathan Hickman actually picked one of like the preeminent retirement places for like their secret base, which is spectacular.
It's so funny. Yeah, I mean, they could be anyone in Sedona.
Exactly.
That's right. They're really undercover. Yeah. Again, like what a huge gift that is to have, you know, a lot of the times we know what we do. We're writing, you know, hyper violent soap operas, but you know, when you are presenting a one that you can't necessarily just punch your way out of the situation, it's a great gift for everyone. It's a great gift for those characters. It's a great gift for fans. You know, I read that issue and I was like, oh, this is. And by the way, I that was the best issue of Dawn of X until I think X-Men 4, which I know has not rolled off a printer yet. A totally different vibe.
Hmm.
You know, a different muscle group that he's flexing, and you know, it's Christmas again.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, so
Well, I did want to ask about you were talking about how great the environment is working on these books. And when I was researching for this, it seems like sometimes ideas for even Marauders like have come from like Jonathan or Jordan or whomever.
yeah.
Is the kind of quote unquote writers room, is it kind of the type of thing where because everyone's got this positive energy and everyone's moving in the same direction that you kind of are all sending each other ideas in a very like collaborative way that's like maybe a little different than for hire work normally is?
I think that's fair. Yeah, I think Jordan was the one who pitched that Kate couldn't use the gates,
Oh.
and I'm almost positive it might have been Jonathan. I don't think it was me. And it sort of sat there for a minute, and then uh, I'm not sure. I don't think it was instantly ratified. You know, nobody was. And then I was like, wait, that's a great beat for her.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, you start, it's like that classic sort of improv, yes, and where you go, absolutely this, and then what if this? And in the case, I know Jonathan suggested, hopefully I would have gotten there. I was not there. But some of the, sometimes this is, uh, because it's a shared universe, some of the toys sort of come with you know, like extra instructions or what's the right way to say this? Like in the case of who would be joining Sebastian at Blackstone,
Mm-hmm.
uh, you know, we went back and forth on some names, and then I think Jonathan rang me and just said, "Hey, should be Shinobi.
Yeah.
He should be doing it for his son." And
Mm-hmm.
then I was like, "Of course he should be doing that."
Yeah.
You know, and so some of the stuff requires going away and thinking about it. You know, or because some of it is a problem to solve where you go, "Hey, such and such character is not available for this." It creates a gap where I'm going to have to revise something. Let me know if you have a thought. And you know, we're all better together than we are apart individually, except
Mm-hmm.
for maybe Jonathan. Jonathan cook this stuff up. Uh, but you know, we cooked up something today in our group messages that you know, was something that I was a little worried about. And then all of a sudden at the end of it, I was like, well, here we are. And this is much, much better than it was only a few minutes ago before these suggestions that just get ratified. Because once you have someone, you know, my favorite quote, and I don't even know if it's true, belongs to, I don't even know if he said it, belongs to Ebert, Roger Ebert. He said, you can't talk someone out of a laugh or a boner. And I was like, that's great. You know, once you have somebody that laughs and slaps their knee and goes, that's great, you go, all right, that's a buy. We can start building on that. And, you know, in the Marauders case, you know, you sort of, you, you went back to the beginning the same way that I did, where I go, these two, Emma and Kate, you know, arrived together and then very quickly were, you know, very apart. And now, you know, Whedon wrote some great stuff with them, and a lot of people have over the years. And now I'm sort of borrowing them and nudging them even closer. Um, and it's been fun. It's been fun to play with these relationships. It's been fun. We've seen Sebastian and Shinobi at each other's throats for so long. What happens when they have to work together? And you know, it's hopefully ending up as much fun for the readers as it is for us to cook up.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, honestly, like one of the things that I love the most about it is there's this. I don't know if it's the right way to describe it, but there's like this crazy madcap energy to it at times. It's kind of got like,
Yeah.
this is about as nice of a compliment as I can give a comic, Jerry, but it has like some next wave vibes to it.
Oh, cool. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, sure,
yeah,
sure.
where
Well,
it's
that's high praise. Yeah.
yeah, I'm a massive next wave fan. It's just got like this real energy, and I think I mean like when they were in, oh man, were they in Tokyo in the second issue?
They were in. They've been in Tokyo canonically very quickly. They will be in Taipei
Okay.
very quickly. They Madripoor has come up a little bit. That's been the fun thing for me with Marauders too. The great thing about that Marvel universe is about how Marvel's Manhattan is really almost a character in itself, where you could have Spider-Man web swing by Daredevil or by the Baxter Building or 4 Yancey Street or what have you. But this book felt like it needed to have some elbow room and just go, you know what? I don't need to sail the Hudson every week to be in Marvel's Manhattan. It's a very big world, and so to park it up there has been neat.
Yeah, and it doesn't really fit the mission statement of the book if you just kind of hung around New York or anything like that.
Totally.
Like it's going to Madripoor or going to like yeah, I mean honestly the kind of the playbook for your entire series was almost laid out in I'm trying to remember what issue it was. I want to say it was House of X number 6, but it was the one where there was the list of the countries that were not partaking,
Totally.
and it
Yeah.
was just like this is your playbook. But the cool thing is like all those countries are pretty fun to work with. Like if I could just have a book that's set in Madripoor all the time, I'd probably be happy, because like Madripoor is just like pure insanity 24/7.
Yeah.
It's just like a place where every time I hear Madripoor, I'm like, yeah, I'm interested in that book.
Well, you're gonna like, we're not gonna talk much future story stuff, but you'll already, having bought into Marauders, you'll only feel better about your purchase.
You've already
Uh,
given me Batroc, so I'm deeply, deeply happy about that. I love Batroc. It's one of my
I
irrational
do
love
too.
characters.
I legit, yeah, he's great. He's and a gentleman, the gentleman combatant.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he seemed like a pretty reasonable dude about everything that was happening, and like he even was like kind of like familiar with Kate and with the rest of the X-Men to a certain degree. Probably because like if you're a mercenary, you just get in scraps with everybody, and you're like, no hard feelings. It's just money. No big
Yeah,
deal.
this
So
is how we do it.
exactly.
And there is what we're trying to do in Marauders, especially, is sort of go, hey, the world has been violently turned upside down. They All of a sudden, a country that didn't exist a couple of weeks ago is here and has miracle drugs and wants to offer them to you and is filled with super people. And have I'm trying to remember, and forgive me now, I seem like a real dum dum. Has the data pages, have we printed Xdesk stuff
Yep,
yet? We
yep, yep.
started. Gotcha.
Yeah.
So, and that's been really cool, is just to go, oh shit, what are the like implications of this for the financial world, for the medical world, for the intelligence community? And the cool thing that being in international waters does is all of a sudden things are murky. If a ship got attacked in the Atlantic, well, did it? Well, who's telling the story? Maybe. What do we know? What do we don't know? As soon as you're kind of fighting on land, you're like, well, we can look at these security cameras and we can do this. And, so it gives me a lot of flexibility you know, uh, to own the seas, so to speak. And I don't know. We'll see what comes of Arc 1. We're still moving pieces into place. There's another big piece that's going to come in before the end of the year, I think, because we're shipping twice now in December, or we just shipped 3. We're going to ship 4, and so in 4 you'll see that there's another big piece, a corner piece of the puzzle that will be a long term source of conflict in the book.
Sure, sure. I do want to talk about the cast, and
Sure.
to start with, you don't need to go into details because like I'm sure you can't, but I am curious as to how the the books were were split up. Like in my head, there was basically all the writers were having a fantasy draft, but I'm
You know
guessing
what? It honestly was not dissimilar to that.
okay.
We October 18 was the first time I heard it. I guess about a year ago now, the initial wave one dawn of X writers met in New York, and a fantasy draft happened. It's really true.
I love the fact that I feel like there's certain characters that were allowed to be picked twice because Wolverine is both an X Force and well, I kind of an X Men. I mean, the X Men is really just like a Cyclops book with like a rotating cast of characters, seemingly, or to a degree, to a degree.
Yeah, I think the X-Men is whatever Jonathan really needs it to be at that moment. You know,
Sure.
the X-Men feels like it's an aircraft carrier that just launches big ideas.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, and but again, that's the super cool thing to me. You know, back in the day, I think it was the like everyone remembers Blue and Gold, and what team are you on? Well,
Right.
mutants are all on the same team now.
Yeah.
So really, it's whatever we need in the flagship book in order to accomplish what he needs to do for the story. Um, and boy, I wish X-Men 4 was out so we could talk about it. It's really really cool, that book. It's a lot of fun to be wrenching on that stuff. But you were asking about the cast. Were there specifics, or were
Yeah.
there?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what I remember of that time though was we all. I probably had a more baked sense of what my book was because I had been marinating in it for much longer, maybe than some of the other folks, and that might not even be true. Maybe I was, but I knew obviously that that Jonathan and I had been able to talk about some of this stuff, where some of this stuff, fed back into Hawks and Pox, where we knew we're going to have some countries that were going to be no, and then I think my only request of Jonathan and Jordan at that point was like, I just need some coastline.
Right.
So some of these no's
Then you be island
for my
countries.
yeah, would be either island countries or have large stretches of coast, and that would be fertile nose for me.
Hmm.
And it ended up perfect. But there were, I'm almost positive, it would be fun to break it out someday. Um, we had names of the characters on note cards for a lot of them, and
Hmm.
then sort of columns for what books they would be in at what time. X-Men didn't have that because Jonathan would be able to borrow for any of them. But
Right.
there was the keys to all of them, with two notable exceptions. One being Franklin, right, and the other being Storm, where we were not exactly sure how those characters might be positioned, and because of um, Coates and Slot. And it's a lot to ask someone to sort of go, "Hey, I'm writing something 18 months from now. You know, can you give me a general sense of?" And so we just said, "Great. Like we're going to work with all of it.
Yeah.
Whether it's going to be out in space or in Wakanda or whatever, we would accommodate it." I wanted Storm for personal reasons, and for personal reasons for her own reasons that would also be personal inside the book. She just is nervous, as are a lot of the folks about Kate's situation after or she breaks her nose on the door.
Right.
Um, and so it was important for me to have her there in that first issue, in that first scene.
Hmm.
Uh, and having Kurt there is great too.
Yeah.
But it's not just a Kate book. We've seen that now in the third issue where she didn't even appear.
Hmm.
But the full cast does kind of come together in the fourth and fifth issues, and then all hell breaks loose in a great way in the sixth issue.
Well,
And that feels like my first chapter. Actually, if I could condense everything and just go, my opening is the not the first issue, but the first arc. Like that's how long. That's the benefit of just the long runway that most um, comic books don't have.
right.
Is that I'm sitting here writing it for so long that like I've now written more than can be published at the moment. I'm writing ahead.
One thing I thought was a very crucial point that Jonathan made during like the interviews he was doing was somebody asked about like, these being X-Men books. And he's like, these aren't X-Men books. These are mutant books. These are books about the mutants. And I thought that was a really good point, especially. So what I want to do is kind of semi-rapid fire going through the cast and just talking about what your thoughts were on each of them ahead of time and what makes them interesting to you as characters. But the first one, Pyro is like, I mean, he's a character that's long been associated with the X-Men because, his Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. He was involved with a lot of key stories. He was in the animated series, et cetera, et cetera. But he's always been a villain. He's always been this guy that has been contrary to the X-Men rather than part of it. In this New World Order, mutants are mutants, and it's not as clean as just X-Men and Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. So what made Pyro somebody that was interesting to you for this cast?
I wanted someone who would have their life also turned on their head. He was instantly out of work, right? The Brotherhood of Evil Mutants closed up shop the moment that Apocalypse shook hands with Xavier.
Right.
So you have this, Dawn of X was a new dawn for mutantdom.
Mm-hmm.
And so having that character made a lot of sense to me once I realized that, and I say this lovingly, that Lockheed could have a pet mutant.
Yeah, I saw you say that, and I was just like, I love it.
Yeah, there's a cool elemental thing in the book, and granted, I grabbed some of the biggest toys. Like I ate like a fat guy at a buffet and grabbed my all-time favorite characters and threw them into a book. And so I'm glad it landed, because had it not been, I would have had Jonathan and Jordan, then I would have had, Russell on covers and Mateo on interiors, and gone, there's only one potential weak link here. And it would have been me. But I have Storm, I have, so I have earth and air and fire, and with Iceman, I have water.
Mm-hmm.
On a book that should feel big in scope and out on the waves, and that really starts to kick in the balance of the first arc. That felt right.
Yeah. Well, I also feel like Pyro and Sebastian Shaw kind of speak to the New World Order. They're almost like they're not a mission statement, but they're kind of a statement of like, this isn't just the X-Men. This is something different and new. And, it's not like, I mean, X-Men have a history of their villains becoming X-Men, but this isn't really that. This is something different. And I thought Pyro was a nice step in that direction. But all right, so the next person I want to mention is Bishop, who is only, I think only appeared in the second issue. As a 90s kid, I have a deep, deep love for our guy, Lucas Bishop. But at the same time, like he has had a very tumultuous, let's say, last decade. And so, like, putting him in this position, like, why was he something that you thought would be a nice addition to the mix?
I'm gonna, at the risk of insulting a lot of people, and that's not what I want to do, I sort of didn't know exactly what I was getting in Bishop.
Sure.
Obviously, I've read a lot of the stories, but I couldn't tell you like what's important to that guy or who his best friend is. And he seemed like a guy that, if you were gonna draw him like a Peanuts character on Christmas with a tree there, he could use some presents.
Right.
And so that was the goal of sort of, I know exactly who Storm is. And I know who Kitty was, but I'm going to make you love Kate. Bishop was a guy where I was like, you know what, I know what I think his strengths are, and what he could be, and Marauders 4, uh, we start to really sort of put the spotlight on him a little bit and go, oh, interesting. Here's this other sort of layer to him that I didn't quite. And by the way, I'm not 100% sure that like I'm describing or will have. When you get to the end of Marauders 4, you'll go, boy, I'm thinking of Bishop in a new light. Not 100% sure that I'd want to be friends with the guy, but he will hopefully feel like someone who is coming into focus in an interesting way. I gotta, since we're talking about 90s comics and characters, there's a weird thing with me where after 92, the curtain comes down for me largely
Sure.
on 90s characters and comics, because I was heading off to college and I didn't have a lot of money to read comics, and so uh, and it was around the time of Death of Superman,
Hmm.
where I just was like, you know what, comics have been good to me. I love comics. I'm gonna take a break because I don't want to fall out of love in comics, and there was a lot of stuff happening that I just couldn't keep track of or didn't. Like when I was having to turn my comic sideways because like that, there was this like 90s tendency, I think, to like all of a sudden do pages like where you had to turn the comic. Do
Yeah.
you remember that? I just
Yeah.
remember turning the comic and just going like, you know what, I'm gonna take a break and come back some other time. And so I didn't have. I remember Bishop back then, but he was somebody who, in my mind, um, could use a little bit of TLC, and
Sure.
I think that's what he gets in a cool way. Um, I know we don't quite have clarification of how he's involved, but he will, like all of them, he will be presented with a personal reason for being on the boat.
He's just an interesting character because I mean, I think this decade, he was basically the villain of a large X-Men event in which he was trying to kill a
Yeah.
child or a baby
Yes. Yes, that's right. That's exactly right.
who is now one of the five.
Right. That's right.
Oops, you were trying to
Hey,
kill like one of their like deity people.
I know. How cool is that, by the way? That's the other cool thing that
The five.
Hawks did. Yeah, where you go, and I'm trying really hard not to screw up future story points, but there's a lot of stuff that could be accomplished even inside of Marauders, mutant to mutant, and
Because of the
the
five.
idea that, yeah, that you can make or because not just because of the five, but like the idea that mutants can kind of become a circuit,
Oh
and
yeah. Hmm.
what might be accomplished in tandem.
Elementals.
Yeah, elementals, but also, the idea that like Charles would run them through the danger room to go, here's what you can accomplish as a team. I'm
Yeah.
not necessarily sure he was ever sort of going, here's what Iceman and Storm could accomplish together. And some of that starts to break out at the end of the first arc too.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I mean it is really interesting. We were talking before we started recording about how the five really opens things up in so many interesting ways. I mean, honestly, like what, two of your characters were dead before this book? Like before Hawks and Pox, like Pyro and Shinobi Shah. Well, let's talk about, I want to talk about Sebastian next because issue number 3 just came out. You had a purely Sebastian Shaw centric issue, which I think, I don't know this for sure, but might be the first time that's ever happened.
Yeah, I believe that in the grand scheme of the publishing, or maybe he's had like a backup or something. But
Maybe.
and what's weird? I didn't really mean to write it like this. There was so much to sort of set up because I really tried to look at the first issues as sort of the opening adventure to a Bond film. Where you go, let's have some fun, let's see what's new. But there's a lot of information that you didn't have. You didn't know about Hellfire Bay, or we had threatened you with it, but you hadn't seen it. And then there's, I think the people that might have been upset that Shaw seemed like he got really punked in those first two issues, at least had to respect his game of going, hey, I keep my cards pretty close to my foppish vest,
Right.
and I will turn them over as I see fit. I love all of the old Hellfire gang. Like, I've become fond of saying I know my history, our history, and then I know the X-Men history,
Yeah.
and the all the crazy stuff that they've done to each other and done outside of it. It's like, what a great circus.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the things I really like about what you're doing with him, though, is I think a lot of people think of him as this dude who like takes in kinetic energy and then just wrecks people with it. But I mean, he's a businessman and he's like an operator, and like
Yeah,
it seems like you're really
yeah.
kind of getting into that.
I mean, in that issue, in Marauders 3, he really only uses his power on one panel to
Right.
sort of smack some human cultists upside the head, and that's right. You're exactly right. I think if you were to ask him what his superpower would be, it would be like, I am really good at operating, at
Yeah.
being a businessman.
Yeah.
I just also happen to store kinetic energy.
which makes it like much easier to handle when things get really tough when you're operating people too much.
Yeah, that's right.
I do gotta say, you touched on one of my favorite things that I was really excited about from Hawks and Pox. I'm probably like a very, very narrow group of people who took this away from, I think it was House of X or Powers of 10, number 6. And Moira has one gate in her room, in her like, no, God, what the hell is it called?
Yeah, the no space.
The no space, right? In her no space, and it goes to one of the best culinary cities in the entire world. And like, I love that, and the fact that Sebastian Shaw, his like number one priority after like reviving his dead son, is like, let's go get some good food in New York.
Yeah,
I mean, like, I just love that. That's like, it seems like very on brand for Sebastian Shaw to abuse Krakoa's gates to go and get
yes.
delicious steaks.
He walks to New York and then takes a carriage to Keen's Chop
Yes,
House, which, if you've never been, is a real restaurant, and it is
I
a
believe
delight.
it.
Yeah, it is
Yeah.
great. It's on 36th in Midtown. It's been there forever. Uh, I'm very distantly related to Buffalo Bill Cody,
Oh,
and he's got a pipe hanging in there. There's all these pipes on the ceiling back from the days when you could enjoy tobacco in a enclosed restaurant, and it's really cool. But a wonderful place that I was like, you know what? Of course, Sebastian would be craving, a return to New York, and that Krakoa is wonderful, but the mutton does not grow on the shrubs yet. They have yet to work out that kink.
and the other thing with Sebastian too is like, I feel like to a certain degree, Krakoa is. I'm not trying to dig in. You're not saying this, but I feel like it would be something that's almost kind of emasculating to him. And so, getting out into the real world where he actually has power still, that's like, and for somebody who is all about like accepting people's like energy and like sending it back out there, he kind of gets neutered a bit in the Krakoa situation. And I feel like going to
Yeah, I don't disagree. Yeah.
but well,
No, sorry. Go ahead.
no, I was actually going to bring up one thing I thought was interesting, and this is kind of a very abstract idea, but it was like, I was thinking about kind of political machinations versus character based ones. So you have like, obviously, like the third issue is really about Sebastian Shaw kind of setting up his game, his like the way he's playing it and like doing his own thing on the side away from the rest of everyone that's involved. Do you feel like, so that's like the political machinations, but it kind of all builds off of character based ones. Do you feel like those are separate things, the political versus the character, or because of the nature of the cast, they're just inseparable? They're one and the same, basically.
It's tough to separate. I think you're absolutely right. that it's a political consideration. But the thing that when I sat down to think about, well, how does Sebastian deal with this stuff? Emma's got the upper hand. He's not going to like that. He's not going to want that. He's going to want to resist that. He would love to be able to have named some sort of surrogate into the red so that he could have that control that part of the voting block. I think to me the thing in that third issue that was the gift that I tried to give to Shaw is the one of just kind of his cynicism. Right?
Mm-hmm.
There's so much optimism going on amongst not just the characters but the creators, and what a great fun time it is to be into mutants and be into X-Men, and for the characters. We're behind the curtains world building. A lot of these characters are the ones that are on stage who are doing it. It's the Charleses and the Magnetos and certainly the Moiras, but Emma is critically important. And now also, hey, we can't do this alone. We need Sebastian. Why? Well, we're going to need his underworld contacts to control the price of the drug in the no countries. But Sebastian sort of was able to open himself to Shinobi and say, look, these drugs have a limited span for humans. They can't take them forever. So we have a 5-year opportunity to just bring every dollar out of them, because that's who he is, right?
Right.
That is the guy. He was shorting mutantdom back in the day, like involved in the Sentinel program. He's a guy who comes with all this terrible baggage. But that I think is the key to success, is writing your villains. I grew fond of talking about Deadpool and just sort of saying I was letting him talk to me. Like he would figure out a way out of the traps that I would set him, because I would just write the villains and Deadpool would write himself. But that remains largely true. If you can make these wonderful villains the heroes of their own story, because really, if you just read Marauders 3, he's come up with a whole alternate history about the formation of Krakoa.
Oh yeah.
It's 1776 on Krakoa. Like, we're just getting going, and he's the guy that is the hero of the Republic, which is great. Like, that is such a gift. It is such a great gift to be able to write a character like that who is just going to write his own ticket.
Yeah.
And look, I know a lot of people hate Sebastian. I don't think he's a good guy, but I think we'll all come to either love him or love that we hate him.
Right.
Whatever it is, he's going to make you feel something, and that's the gold standard in any of this. Is was I able to help with my collaborators to push your emotional buttons? That's all I want.
Well, I read that that Emma is like pretty much your favorite character from any of the ones you're writing. I mean, she has got a lot more overlap with Sebastian. Like, she pre-Morrison was basically where Sebastian is now, to a certain degree, where it's just like always a bad person, but maybe there's something more. And I do think that because you're almost getting to play with Sebastian like 15 years later with Emma. And I guess like with her, what makes her your favorite character to write? I mean, if you had to choose one, it seems like that is a favorite.
I sincerely do love her. I love, the thing though that I love is, speaking of circuits again, her by herself is interesting. Her with some of the other characters we're putting around her, it commands my full attention. There's days when I should be focusing on either my family or Savage Avengers or something else, and I'm writing Marauders, and that's how I ended up so far ahead, because
you're on a roll.
Yeah, and I think she's more or less said this verbatim. Where I think you know Kate Pryde is someone who she wants around because she wants to have her. She wants to impress her. That was clear in that first issue.
Hmm.
Uh, and so, the cool thing about Emma right now too is, when this will become more clear. She is, she's a feminist, and she's interested in making sure that it's not just an old white guy world,
Right.
and that also just feels like great. That's a comic book that I'm happy to be a part of right now.
Yeah.
But she's again, like, she is. I think she steals the show in Stefano's first issue, but you'll have to. I'll trust your judgment more than mine. There's some really cool stuff coming up for all of these characters, and Emma especially.
Is it Stefano Caselli?
Yeah.
Ooh, I didn't know that Stefano was coming up. I love Stefano's stuff.
Oh yeah. He's great. He's coming aboard. He's coming aboard with issue 7, and so he's going to be a big part of our plans moving forward.
I gotta give some shouts though, really quick, to because Michelle Bandini stepped in for 3,
Yes.
and I like how Marvel manages some of the, like, it kind of reminds me of Immortal Hulk, where it kind of gives like the main artist some time, but like I don't know if that's Michelle's only issue, but
No, I hope not. Yeah.
she did some amazing work. But the art so far, I mean, Matteo Lolli has been great. One of the things, we've already talked about Kate a lot, so I'm not going to ask you for a deep dive on her, but one thing I really love about what you've done and what Matteo did with her visually was how you used her powers. And it's, I remember, to steal from Whedon Cassiday's astonishing again, I remember that there was this line in there about how the reason why they wanted her on the team. One of them is Emma wanted her as a check for her, but another one was the fact that
Yes.
she was kind of perceived as like her powers were protective, like her powers were almost inoffensive, and it was like the public face to the X-Men. And the fact that in the very first issue, you and Mateo found a way to deploy her powers in maybe a shockingly aggressive way, I loved it. I thought it was great.
Oh, good. Yeah. I'm glad. Well, it's about it goes back to, like, rewinding it all the way back before anything was written or drawn. Like, I knew that she was someone that we could change at almost any velocity,
Hmm.
and the quicker the better, in my opinion, versus going, hey, Storm's going to have a mohawk and be stabbing people and whatever else, and then sort of going, now I'm causing problems in other areas.
Hmm.
Like, she was someone that wholly had the keys, that we had the keys to the car, where we were like, we can disseminate this information to everyone. Go, Kate has some ink now that she didn't have before, and she's a little bit more aggressive because she's got a chip on her shoulder. Well, funny about the reaction to that was how many people I saw uh, that A, loved it. That was great.
Hmm.
That B, though, were sort of like almost adopted the position of the villains to go, she really is a marauder. She came into a sovereign nation and blah, and was really hurting and maiming people. And I was like, man, the aggressor sets the tone,
Right.
right? Like, these were people that had kidnapped a bunch of mutants, and the scene opened with, very deliberately, a 3-round burst from an auto rifle that would have been fatal for anyone
Right.
else but her. She took a deep breath, and then she was like, okay, I guess I'm gonna have to work through this with you guys, and I'm gonna be as gentle as I can. But it was fun to be able to give her that moment that I feel like, um, she'd always she'd been trained by ninjas in the 80s, and
Yeah.
then sort of, and by the way, like this all makes sense to me, and you can let me know if you agree with me or you think that it's BS. I almost think the reaction to gaining all of that like lethal knowledge was to like whiplash into the other direction and go, you know what, I'm gonna for a while,
Yeah.
and I'm like I'm gonna help kids, and I'm not gonna really think about how I could phase someone into a lamppost and maim them.
Right.
And now the most telling balloon for her in those first two issues was sort of the tattoo artist who she just said, "Yeah, I'm a former school teacher." She's still figuring this out, and that's always fun.
Hmm.
That's kind of the fun too of young, inexperienced characters who are not Kate necessarily, but the fun of a Nova or the fun of a young Peter Parker is that these characters will act impulsively or make mistakes. That it's a different kind of fun than you get with like Captain America,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But I am committed to look. I'm writing a book about mutants on the high seas. They're gonna drink. They're gonna kiss. They're gonna fight. They're gonna, and all of this maybe all amongst themselves, and then they'll sort of branch out. And there's gonna be booty, and there's gonna be alcohol, and a lot of this actually will become even clearer why that is the case as towards the end of the year.
Hmm.
I'm happy to come back and sort of go on trial for some of this stuff with you eventually, but
I mean, I highly doubt that's going to be the case. I'm an extremely easygoing reader, Jerry. I am like, as long as it's a fun story, like I'm not one of the people who is going to be. I'm not saying that like anybody necessarily does this, but like fact checking against continuity or something like that. Like
sure.
I just enjoy it for enjoying it. But, I do want to ask really quick, about the two characters we haven't mentioned, because I feel like we can't not mention Iceman and Storm. Iceman and Storm, is their position kind of like, is part of the reason why they interested you was because they've known Kate for so long and like they kind of provide a good contrast from where she came from and where she is now?
I think for 100%, the idea that I wanted Kate and Storm together, and Bobby was my stretch goal. I
Hmm.
knew that I would write Bobby eventually, and I was hoping it was going to be here. Uh, and look, I'm writing a pretty gay book. I have Iceman, I have Shinobi who's bi. I'm writing pirates. Look, I wanted Bobby,
Hmm.
and I was very very happy to sort of come out of our fantasy draft with what I had.
Right.
Um, I think there have been times where oh boy, this is not going to sound great. I'm not always 100% sure that the creative teams that inherited Bobby necessarily knew what they wanted to do with Bobby.
Hmm.
And I have very specific gifts that I want to give him.
Okay.
I know exactly what I want to do to Bobby.
Yeah, sure. Sure. Well, what about Storm?
Storm's great. Storm, though, this is, I think we try to keep the curtains up as much as we can on some of the stuff,
Sure,
that
sure,
we're,
sure.
however, with Storm, um, I was not 100% sure. You're reading material now that rolled off a printer, and I was not 100% sure where in the where she would be in orbit.
Right.
All these characters have orbits, and some of them take some of their paths uh, are fling very far and wide. And none of us wanted to sort of cramp anybody. And we were like, no, of course, we don't want to pull her out of Panther or the other places where she was. Storm's coming into focus. Storm has a lot of big stories coming up, but we didn't open with them because
She's got a lot of narrative responsibility elsewhere.
that's just it, is just to go, we were asking really hard questions. That was the cool thing about X-Men and why it feels different now and why the mutant books feel different is because Jonathan got, the keys to all of these cars at once. And that's the super cool thing, that you just go, yeah, of course Kate can be a pirate, and Betsy can be Captain Britain, and of course Logan and Beast are going to form the mutant CIA, and absent of the other considerations. But Storm, we had those other responsibilities, I guess, to make it seem like like she's an actual person running from one theater to another.
Right.
That's what it feels like. There were stories of actors that would do that,
Yeah.
that would like appear, in the first act and then not again in the second act, and sort of go over and be in the chorus of another thing. I love her. Like again, like I think the first issues that I remember reading, right brand new, from the printer to the rack, were around the time that she challenged
Callisto.
Cyclops
Oh, Cyclops. Cyclops. Yeah.
leadership. Yeah, yeah. But also the Callisto stuff. I mean, look, it's not any secret that like I'm writing Callisto. If you've seen the
Right. The
solicits
cover.
and you've seen the amazing Russell covers, yeah, that like, of course. I was like, oh, a mutant pirate book? Like, I gotta have the woman with the eye patch and the knives. She was she was waiting for this gift her whole life, and she's got a really cool piece to it.
So does that make Lockheed a parrot?
Visually, absolutely, that was the goal of sort of like, but obviously, I would never say that to Lockheed. I don't want my, I don't want my face full of fire.
Yeah. Well, I just have a few more questions. These are like broader questions. Like the first one, I read a quote from you where you said, it was in an interview where you said, I feel like every issue of Marauders is another debut for a character or a new big idea. I think that's what the X-Men books really are now. Huge cannons that shoot big ideas. I love that. That's awesome. But
That's pretty good.
yeah, it's great. Good job. Good job. But the thing I think is really interesting about that is like, obviously big ideas are important to this whole thing, but how important is it to balance the big ideas with the small moments? Because so much of these characters and their relationships are built on like the nuances of their relationships. Is that like always an important consideration for you?
I think so. We can. That's the super cool thing about comics, right? Is that like I can crash two helicarriers together in midair, and if the people in parachutes are sort of like, I taking time to check in with each other, you go, that's great, and look, it was important to at least begin with these mutants that would know each other and be that are family. Like I remember when Kitty freaked out that Aurora shaved her head into
Mm-hmm.
the mohawk. Like I like that is an opportunity for me now. The same way I have Iceman in the book as a now out and proud gay man who is also serving on a boat, filling a very important role with someone that he dated, right? Where he was not honest with himself and with her because he wasn't ready yet.
Mm-hmm.
And like, that's a lot of grist for the mill.
Right.
I think, I think when I said this the first time, I was probably suffering some imposter syndrome. But the real truth of it is, I know what I do. I write violent soap operas,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm proud of that. Not everyone can can do it the way that we do it. But like that's, nobody is there to sort of see the the carnage is fun, but that's not what will keep you coming back. And that's not to say that the action stuff isn't important. It is important. It has to be written well. It has to especially be drawn well. But we are here because we sincerely love these characters. There were so many moments in Hawks and Pox that made me like fist pump the air.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing. And I think I said this to a Storm fan. I think I wrote this to a Storm fan on Twitter. I was like, hey, I know what you want. I was like, everyone wants to see their favorite kick some ass. And it's unfortunately my job to torture these characters, but X-Men has always been in one way or another about family. And there was a family for all of them. Even the Misfits got to hang out in the Morlock tunnels, and, by the way, that's another fascinating question that I won't get into now, but like, how do the Morlocks fit into this? They didn't feel like they even had a place in mutant society. Now, like a Hawaiian island, like there are still so many questions and so many what ifs that are future stories. That if everyone's loving it now, just give Jonathan and all of our collaborators enough time. Like there's so much still. This is only the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
And CB has mutant blood in him. Like CB's another one. Like
that sounds unhealthy, if I'm being honest.
he hasn't got long. No, but like he's another guy that lived and breathed and would crush up and snort all of the mutant comics. That like he's a mutant guy, and so a lot of this just has to do with now so many of the young readers that were loving X-Men for years now are in a position to sort of pay it forward, that it's happening at this really cool pace.
It is really funny how that works though, because the people who are reading the comics in the 90s, I feel like they're like the current generation of like the ones that have been coming in and everything like that. And so you have this
I totally agree.
Yeah, you have this foundation of people who grew up on like Claremont X-Men and like 90s X-Men that are now making the comics, but also have enough, I guess, maybe distance from it where they can not like treat it, not worship it to the point where you neuter your own stories. And
totally.
and I think that's where a lot of like, that's why I think that Jonathan is so, not to make this a Jonathan Hickman fan podcast, but it's like, you needed.
I'd be on it. Yeah.
you needed somebody who wouldn't treat. I'm going to get my metaphor wrong, but you don't want to treat it like a golden calf. You don't want to treat it like something where you can't touch it, or you can't break things, or you can't fix things. Because that was one of the things I talked to him about when he came on the podcast. Was one of the rules of the writers' room is like, you're not trying to destroy, you're trying to add, you're trying to build. And like, I think that you needed somebody that could bridge the distance between being a big fan but also being able to separate yourself from that fandom, if that makes sense.
Totally. I don't know what the right way to say this is, but the idea that continuity, it's malleable.
Right.
There have been plenty of gifts that writers and artists have given to these characters that are gifts that you wish came with a gift receipt. And to be able to undo some of the stuff, you even look at what, has been accomplished for Betsy and Quan, and you just go, yeah, we're fixing the place up as best we can. And I know that I know that I didn't make decisions that pleased everyone, and I would have been baffled and confused, I guess, if everyone had gone, I love Captain Kate Pryde, I would have been shocked, and I would have gone, this is not right. So that there are people that are just going, yeah, that's not my kitty, and I won't call her Kate. And I go, you are entitled to that opinion. But for everyone else, you go, here's a new thing. Life changed super rapidly. And, the other fun thing about continuity, though, is there are so many like little veins of gold that can be mined for this stuff. There's I put a lot of this into the early Marauders issues that are things that you think are throwaway things that will actually yield some story points that will tickle the nerd funny boners of a lot of longtime X-Men fans. It's not just Emma and Kitty's first issue. We're gonna call back to some other stuff, and that's only because like we've been thinking about it for this long. We've been
Yeah.
thinking about it before we had the job. It's just crazy that you know thinking about it for a lifetime can actually put you in a position to then change the universe and add to it and build to it. It does sometimes make you feel like maybe Alan Moore is right and we're wizards. I turn I turn thoughts about these characters into electricity to keep my son warm. Like there's some argument to be made there that it's all valid.
Well, going back to what you were saying about like the fans and how they, maybe what Captain Kate Pryde wasn't what they wanted or something like that. But the thing is like no good story has ever been told by trying to give people what. Well, maybe not. That might not be true. But most good stories don't come from trying to give people what they want. And beyond that, like
Yeah.
with X-Men fans, I mean, or with comics or really anything, it's just like if you tried to deliver a story that gave every single X-Men fan what they wanted, it would be impossible to do because as Jonathan said on this very podcast, he said that like every X-Men fan has their favorite and thinks that they should star in their own solo book, basically. I mean, that wasn't
Right.
exactly what he said, but that was the gist of it. It's like impossible to deliver what everyone wants simultaneously. So all you can do is tell the best story that you can.
I don't. Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's 100% the goal. And I don't know who I'm stealing this from, so I apologize now. But it's our job to give everyone what they didn't know they needed or they didn't know they wanted.
Right.
Because you're absolutely right. If you sit down and go, I'm going to write something that's going to get the cover of previews and then run into 10 different printings, you're just going to be sitting there. At best, you could just hope to do karaoke,
Yeah.
where you go, yeah, I did Days of Future, Sentinels. And wait, what? That's not what anyone wanted. But it sold a lot of copies. Like the cool thing now that's happening is we're just doing what we legitimately want to see out there in the world that didn't exist. And it's gotten traction because I think these books are really great. I would be thrilled. The highest compliment I can look that I've taken out of all of this stuff is that like the guys that I used to ride to the comic shop with when I was in like seventh and eighth grade are texting me going like, hey, I got to go to the comic shop. I've heard about this stuff that you're up to, that you're helping cook, and I can't wait to check it out. Like there are a lot of lapsed readers back
Mm-hmm.
in X, and it's again like it's lightning in a bottle. You kind of can't separate what one ingredient of it is. It all starts with Jonathan's story, and that set the table. But he's sort of he's a designer, but he accommodates so much other stuff. I did laugh. I listened to the show that you did with him. He did not like being called a showrunner, which is hilarious.
Yeah.
I
No.
think I know a lot of great showrunners that maybe he doesn't. I think the connotation to him was, oh, I'm the guy that just gives notes.
Yeah.
But that's not really it. I mean, the idea, again, it's like he's building a mansion and then going like, hey, I don't need all these rooms. What do you want to put in there?
Yeah.
has been so cool. I will. I hope this lasts a long time. I will miss this when it's gone.
I have to. I can't do a podcast without doing a stupid pop culture analogy, but I feel like because I talked to a lot of retailers about the success of House of X and Powers of Ten and how it was bringing in lapsed readers and everything. I think the amazing thing that happened with those books was they were like the Ferris Bueller of X-Men comics, in the sense that, like, it doesn't matter if you were like, a jock, or if you were this or if you were that, it's like that Jonathan Hickman was one righteous dude and it brought them all in. And like,
That's so funny.
I feel like that was it. But I do want to talk about just two more quick questions. One,
Yeah, I'm not in any rush.
the you were 12 issues ahead by the time the book launched, but there's this
Yeah,
there's an overall
that has dangers too.
I know
You know,
exactly. That's what I was.
luckily it landed.
Well, that's the thing I think is interesting, is like trying to balance your goals with the larger lines goals, because there's your plan, there's Teeny's plan, there's Ben's plan, et cetera, et cetera. Then there's Jonathan's plan, and it to a degree. I have to imagine that you all have to fit within that larger plan. Does that present difficulties to you as a writer at all?
It would, but the real truth is that Jonathan and Jordan and Chris Robinson and Annalise Bissa are so good at, we know, we've read ahead. There is, Jonathan has been very, very forthcoming about what his goals are. And so we know, and they may change, but as long as you're sort of not going to knock over a goalpost, the idea, I felt like my job was just to take as many big swings with some of these characters who, look, people have been spoiled by some really big fun ideas. I think in the classic improv sense of yes and wanting to keep it going, you want to find some other really big fun things that play off of each other, and I think that's really happening. I think the time will tell, but the stuff that is cooking up by the time you get to the end of the first arc of Marauders with that issue 6, I hope A, it's on everyone's pull list, but B, I hope you can say to yourself, I have no idea what is going to happen.
Yeah.
Because that's really the other thing is we all have our individual stories, and we're being collected in that really interesting way that all the ones are being collected, all the twos are being collected. I think it would be so cool to experience the story like that.
Mm-hmm.
Because, to Jonathan's earlier point, sure, it's the X-Men, but it's really mutantdom.
Right.
And what do the X-Men, what does that name even mean in this new world? The X-Men were there to fight for mutants. Well, I'm not, now we have a lot more soldiers in that. So, we'll see what happens. But for right now, I have not felt like I have run afoul of anything that he wanted to do, and we're working far enough out now, and we're talking even, we'll have a retreat before too long, and we'll all come in with some new big fun stuff, but we feel the rope we have from retailers and fans, and I don't think we take that for granted.
Right.
We know we have an audience. We know audiences are fickle. We could lose them, but I think, have been very rewarded by sort of going back to another nautical term of sort of having a compass in our hand and going, no, we're going this way, and this is what we're doing, and we might be moving into a storm, but that's where we need to be right now, and so that's been fun.
I gotta say, you used the non-nautical metaphor earlier, and I was deeply disappointed in you, Gerry. Well, last question. This is kind of a thing I noticed. I feel like, I mean, obviously you're pretty jazzed about the whole X-Men thing. I don't know this for sure, but I have to imagine you're a Conan guy because you are writing Savage Avengers, you're writing Conan 2099, and you also wrote Savage Sword of Conan. Is your current for hire workload basically like peak nerd Gerry Duggan getting what he wanted?
You know what? It's funny you mentioned that because sincerely, I was thinking about this the other day of just going, had a lot of fun on Deadpool, but and then the other stuff that I've been lucky enough to do both on my own and at Marvel. But this does feel like it'll all be downhill after this. Getting to help chart some Conan stories in the Marvel universe, and then also being able to have a Krakoan passport at this moment. Boy, that feels really special. And again, I'd like to think I'm a good collaborator and I have a modicum of talent, but I'm just trying to set up these artists. The smartest thing for anyone out there that wants to be lucky enough to do what I do, ask your collaborators what they want to draw, out of the gate, because you will, in the case of Patrick Zercher, I had said to him, "Hey, let's jump on the phone, but could you do me a favor? Could you just shoot me an email with some characters of some folks that you're hoping to draw, who haven't yet drawn that you want to draw?" And amazingly, he had picked a bunch that were already sort of either in the mix or I was threatening to put into the mix.
Mm-hmm.
And, you just are able to set aside, a couple of characters and go, yeah, you know what? I haven't written too much of, Doctor Strange or Son of Satan, but here's some, we'll do this together. And, when everyone feels like they have authorship, you feel like you can really get going on something and do something special. But I don't take any of it for granted. None of us are entitled to do this job, and I couldn't do it without people adding me to pull lists and retailers going, oh yeah, it's a Duggan book, I know I can sell X of it or whatever. And we're a very comics needs to be aggressively progressive and be ahead of movies and television, but we still have this very 20th century business model where we have a direct market. And I think I love the direct market. The comic shops are really oases of culture. That still feels special. But we have to sell all this stuff 90 days out. And I know nobody likes talking about story. And so, Dawn of X in particular, and Jonathan's, I think the minis to a certain extent required a leap of faith.
Mm-hmm.
Like these guys were going, like Marauders didn't make any sense until you got to like the 5th and 6th issues of the miniseries, where you could sort of see why this book would even exist.
Right.
And they would have, I think retailers had to have already ordered it.
Yeah.
So there was, it's an amazing industry that we have, but it really is, the cradle of, I think, our culture's imagination.
Yeah. Well, obviously I'm in support of it, as I am with Marauders. Gerry, that is all I have for you. Thank you for coming on and talk Marauders, Ferris Bueller, a little bit of everything else. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me. I hope maybe if you have space in your schedule, I'll come back and we'll talk about Marauders after you get to issue 6.
Yeah, let's do it. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with writer Gerry Duggan. You can find him on Twitter at Gerry Duggan and his work in Marauders, Savage Avengers, Deadeyes, and more. As a heads up, Off Panel is once again brought to you by Sketch.com. Check out the new version of the site and consider subscribing for access to all of the site's content and its members-only forum. If you're a fan of Off Panel, make sure to check it out on Patreon. If you back the show on there, you not only support it, but you get early access to each week's podcast, access to weekly content, and more. Also, don't forget to subscribe to Off Panel on iTunes or Spotify, and give the show a rating or review while you're at it. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by liking it on Facebook at /Sketched, that's SKTCHD, follow on Twitter at @SketchComic, or following me at @SliceFriedGold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Chris Rata, Transmitter Down, Harry Sayer, Walt's Comics and Books, Carl Mizell, Danny Ollie, Paul Salath, Litwin Studios, Akil Wilson, Nathan House, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Troy Jeffrey Allen, Leona Kangas, Keegan Ray, Milton Lawson, Wesley Gift, Sean Kirkham, Harry Small, Alistair Ross, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Reinwan, Connor Varner, Vita Ayala, Aditya Bidikar, Tara Ferguson, Dave Slusher, WMQ Comics, Akil, Kokachi, Phil White, Ben Becker, Sean Pinello, Ken Heidelman, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, Nick Michelin, David Kelly, Robert Wilson IV, Nick Polito, Owen McCready, Brendan Fletcher, Gary Maloney, Jonathan Nilsson, Matthew Groom, Jason Massey, Adam Bogert, Xavier Files, Matthew Taylor, Tyler Turner, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Ira James Udaskin, Modern Magic Stories, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Benjamin Shipper, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Greg Rucka, Adam Highfield, Fiona Staples, Chris Hallrent, Mark Abnett, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonacos, Norbert Nicolo, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. Quick thanks to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Off Panel's theme song just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.